So good evening, everyone, and warm welcome on behalf of Exiled Writers Ink, the organization created in 2000 by the founder-director Jennifer Lang, which aims to develop and promote the creative literary expression of refugees, migrants, and exiles, active in providing creative writing workshops, training, live and Zoom occasionally, literature events, theatre, mentoring, and lots more. We have an amazing lineup. The running orders in the chat room, in the chat, and we're going to have a section dedicated to a poet that will be read by her friends and colleagues, Eve Rubin, with us posthumously, her poetry today, and followed by amazing poetry in that order of Aviva Dautch, Maria Jastrzębska, Viv Fogel, Liz Cashdan, and last but not least, Nazand Begikhani. Just as a sort of to sprinkle the field of poetry with the sacrificial 4 lines of my poetry, with huge gratitude to Exiled Writers Ink and amazing mentoring by Aviva Dautch. Sorry, this book would never have happened without both. Just my 4-line summary of migration, what it's been for me. Home from home, home away from home, grateful for both, torn between the two. And let's start with amazing poetry of Eve Rubin. I never knew Eve, but she wrote quite prolifically, and she's an author of 2 books. Eve was a Jewish, lesbian, feminist, and socialist. She lived in Clapton and Hackney until her death from cancer at the age of 60. Her father was a Jewish immigrant, and Eve grew up partly in East London, where her father had the East End Kozov's bakery, if you remember getting bread there. Eve writes about deeply important issues, not only about the complexity of family and belonging, of being a second generation from a refugee family and a feminist, but also about Hackney streets, Calais, and present-day refugees. Reading of Eve's poetry and prose will be done by her friends and colleagues who have performed a true labour of love, of going through all her writing in order to get her work published. The 2 books that I'm lucky to have here, quite substantial, each about 120 pages, a book of poetry. All my life I've wanted to be a New York Jew, and sometimes at night I watched myself in candlelight, have both been edited by Caroline Halliday, illustrated by Julia Statman. And at this moment, I shall hand over the stage to Eve's friends and colleagues to host that part dedicated to Eve. So let's mute everyone and unmute. Nora, are you going to take this?
No, I am going to. Caroline. Can you hear me? You can hear me. Okay. I'm Caroline Halliday, and I'm just going to say a few words about how things went for us with Eve's books. Eve Rubin was a friend of mine for many years. About a year before her death, I suggested to her that we try to get a book of her writing together. She was typically non-committal, and it didn't happen at that point. When we knew how ill Eve was, I connected to the plan again, and although the first book was not ready before she died, she did know that it was going ahead, which was good. And I wished myself that I had pushed the idea with her earlier, but that's how things go, really. So last year, I took up the idea of editing the second book of her short stories. The first book is short stories and poems. Oh, that's a shock. Now you've made me very big now. I'd been working with Eva Mejias, who is a graphic designer and book designer, on my own books. So the process was quite familiar to me. It's hard work, it's creative. We had Julia Statman's drawings and paintings to include in the book. That was great. One of the interesting things for those of you who are writers and readers is that we had a number of manuscripts of Eve's stories, which often had several different endings, and we didn't have a definitive version. Obviously, we couldn't consult Eve, and I decided that I didn't want to have to choose between the endings. And so as the editor, I decided that we should have the different endings in the book, showing the range of versions that a writer has when they are presented in a book. And we've shown them in a different color to the main text. And I think this experiment works well. So enjoy the readings. Thank you for coming. And I hope some of you will buy the books and enjoy them. Thank you.
Hi everybody. Thank you. I'm Jeanette, and I'm one of Eve's friends. I just wanted to say a lot of the work was done by Caroline, and without Caroline, these books wouldn't have come to fruition. So a massive thank you to Caroline, and also to Julia for her kind of wonderful illustrations as well. I'm going to start by just reading a little bit of what Eve herself wrote about her writing and being a second generation from a refugee family. And this was recorded on the 24th of June, 2019, before she died. It's just a very short text. Memory and the subconscious are a huge part, as we know, of any writing or artistic process. So it's not surprising when you write, one thing triggers off another memory. It's not a surprise to anyone who's in the field of creativity, because the memory often triggers off the psychic experience. You may not be aware of the exact memory, but you know it's come from somewhere quite deep, childlike, the original feeling. And she goes on to say a bit later, with me, there's a particular resonance, as with many second-generation children. A lot of work was done just after the Holocaust about children who psychically experienced their parents' pain or trauma of migration and genocide. Even when the parents desperately wanted to protect the children, that's the sad irony, and they often went to great lengths not to tell them, it was encapsulated in their parenting. And the new child was a blessing, but also a terrible fear that something might happen to them. And that fear would never leave their parents. So that's just a little bit of the background to Eve's work. And I'm going to hand on to Nora, who's going to read from the book of poetry. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to read from a long poem, which is the opening poem of this book. All my life, I've wanted to be a New York Jew. And I'll begin by just explaining a few references that some people who are listening might need to know. Ginsberg refers to Allen Ginsberg, the famous American beat poet who hit the New York scene in the 1950s. Shtetl is a Yiddish term for the small towns with predominantly Jewish populations, which existed in Eastern Europe before the Holocaust. Lox is cured salmon, often served on a bagel with cream cheese. There are 2 lines of Yiddish in the poem, so please bear with me. I'll try to pronounce them as best I can. Their meaning is clear in the poem, as the same words are repeated in English in the lines following. Kiddush cup is a cup of wine over which a benediction, a prayer, is recited before the meal on the eve of the Sabbath or a festival. And finally, the evergreen cedar tree, frequently mentioned in the Old Testament, is a symbol of endurance and eternal life. And the burning of cedar wood is believed to bring joy, light, and clarity into our lives. Okay, so the poem itself. A Jew someplace else. Extracts. Forever, I wanted to be a New York Jew, striding down a sidewalk in the Bronx, bellowing up basements from the Lower East Side. I wanted to be a New York Jew, blaring out my Jewishness, beatniking around bagel cafes, swinging my Levite hips, right into the village to meet Ginsberg. Dates were hazy, but desire was not. I wouldn't care who was in earshot of my spat-out shtetl stories, traded on some tacky street corner. My too loud existentialism stirred round and round my coffee cup. I didn't know New Yorkers came from the same broken places. The domestic derangements of my dad, his smoothed out paper bags stashed under my bed, my mother's crazy nightmares, pinned to her yellowing housecoat at sunrise, just another immigrant story. I'd have worked on the Lower East Side, conjuring herring out of a barrel, sculpting cream cheese onto rye, blue notes of jazz wailing over the sawdust floor, laying down locks like it was the finest cut of pink silk, plucking a chicken with the best of them. I'd have worked in the smutter business, snipping and pricking at colored fabrics, the Brooklyn Bridge roping its light into my ragged stitchings. I wanted to be all those things, rather than the Jew I really was, the Jew I really was, here, standing silent next to my dad in his hardware shop, gasping out his Yiddisher English into a muzzled London suburb. Es ist gewesen schwer über dort, und ist schön schwer do auch. It was hard over there, and now it's hard here. Wintertime, when the nights fell around him. I wanted to be a New York Jew, where cool and immigrant ran together, and you could hurl yourself out of any broken door, any day you damn well pleased. Just before I left, I found myself next to Ginsberg, someplace dim and cool in the village, drinking something greenish blue in a goblet, gazing at the sea through my father's cracked kiddush cup, like we were both underwater, just about to rise on the frenzy of our own breath, the scent of cedar wood burning me out clean, purifying me in and out, for the journey ahead. And now I'll hand over to Julia. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Nora. Hello, I'm Julia. How children navigate the world through their earliest memories and make meaning of it mattered hugely to Eve. In the short story, Welcome Back, Dreamer, we see child as narrator of two grandparents' competing memories of homeland, exile, and heritage. And of course, it's been heavily edited for the reading today. Welcome back, Dreamer. My fingers lapped around the bubbles of my grandmother's washing bowl. I was 10 3/4 and had been on washing up duty all year. I fingered the shell-like bones of a small creature, feeling my way up a long, thin, boneless spine and down some smaller, sharper bones that fanned out in all directions. Down in the dark mouth of the sink, I spotted the herringbone that my grandfather had just gutted whole from his plate of fish. Laying it across my palm, I told myself it was a pearly creature of its own. Perhaps all creatures had another creature that lay underneath the one we all saw, a sort of bony other self that was revealed in the last stages. I scooped up a handful of bone chippings and hid them in my pocket. Underneath the warm suds again, my fingers hit upon my grandmother's plates. These were her everyday plates, smeared with egg yolk and speckled with the silver skins of the fish lunch we just abandoned. These were the plates out of which we ate our daily meals, but there were others, my grandmother's special plates. I tipped my head up to the ceiling, up to the place where the highest point of the kitchen wall met the first crack of the ceiling. There they were, the 3 white fluted plates covered in small pink roses. They had their own place there. My Uncle Joseph had made a shelf specially for them, fashioned out of the finest, goldenest beechwood, high above us all. But right from the beginning, they seemed fragile, such thin china and so high up. There they hung, high, high above us all, 3 white discs of light. I'd heard this story many times. Each time it changed a bit, but it was the way my grandmother told it, I suppose. We got them out. Can you believe that? We got them out. The plates themselves were lighter than a set of child's bones. The newspapers we wrapped them in made them heavy, but they were fine, like porcelain from Russia, my homeland. Those plates belonged to my mother. Homeland, my grandfather snorted into his hand. In winter, the soil was so frozen, nothing grew. The children had to smash the soil with a pickaxe. No, the countryside was beautiful, my grandmother said. I remember the tomatoes. They were really red and plump there, blooming out of the earth. The earth was different there. It was so rich, you could eat it. God's earth, we called it when I was a girl. For a moment, I saw my grandmother Leah, a girl like me, her brown body leaning into the soil, her hands cupping a fistful of earth, her thumbs feeling the dense red skin of a plump tomato, pressing a fistful of that rich earth, rich dark earth against her lips. God's earth. She was tasting it with her snake-like tongue, in and out. Her tongue went in and out over the slippery skin of the tomato. Oops. My real-life grandmother broke into my thoughts. The plates will go to you, she said. In the end, you will have the Russian plates. I looked at my grandmother. The older Leah was peering down at me. I was trying to put her together with my vision of the girl, Leah. For a moment, the 2 Leahs collided and I couldn't see either one of them clearly. It was like 2 bits of the jigsaw that should fit, but they didn't. Then my grandmother pulled one of my plaits and her face emerged out of the soap suds. Welcome, Black Dreamer, she said. Did you hear? You can have the plates, the special ones. But behind my ears, I heard my grandfather beginning to shout, "They're nothing to do with her. She knows nothing of what we have seen. She's just a child. What does she want with old plates? She's an English girl. She goes to an English school." My grandmother pulled out a bag of flour from the cupboard above her head. She poured a mountain of it into a bowl and smashed open 3 eggs. You cannot see anyone else's story. You are locked in your own story, she said. We are all locked in our own story. That's how it is, he whispered. I looked up because my grandfather had gone quiet. The light had gone out of his eyes. That was edited from that Welcome Back Dreamer. But now I want to hand back over to Jeanette, who will read another one of Eve's poems.
Well, it's a hard act to follow, Julia.
Oh, go and have a go.
They're really beautiful. Community was very important to Eve, as was social justice. And what was happening. She felt strongly about what was happening to refugees. And this poem is set in Calais, and it's an encounter between a young man and an old man. And it's called Over His Track-Suited Belly. Over his track-suited belly, a globe of light seeps a circle of warm. The boy has stood himself in front of the silver urn here in the camp cafe. The dome teapot lets in a scratch of memory, a splinter of dreaming, cardamom spiced tea in the sodden place of dripping tarpaulins. The boy does not want to see the details of his loss close up, nor floating free in a bowl of tea. An old man sits on a stool, spilling some sugar. Come on, man, sit down. You're going round and round, giddy boat. You're not the only one to come so far. Across the scratch of table, the sugar falls into pools, making a bunch of tiny crystal stars. The man, he wants to show the boy that even here, just here, he has something to throw away, and also something to give. Even here in this dark place, where it feels like everything has been taken. The open sleight of hand reveals the flap of his trouser, hoisted up with a scrap of rope. But the rope, it reminds the boy of the journey. Thin boat, like a pencil flung out, sea smeared in a crumpled sheet of sky, all stars torn out. The boy, he does not want to see the details of his loss close up, nor floating free. Come on, man, sit down next to me. On some starless nights, the boy uncoils his soft parts. They spring back by dawn. And I'm going to hand back to Julia for some more of Eve's stories.
That really was lovely. Beautiful, beautiful. So, oh, hello again. Sugar Towers in the Sky is the other short story I chose to share. It's humane, funny, political, and it's set in a sweet shop. It captures a teenager's desire to escape the confines of a world, fired by imagination and desire. And it's political, which you're learning that Eve was, the writing often was too. Seeking connections with the personal and the political, the internal and the external worlds. And she didn't shy away from going where the pain is. So this is also heavily edited for the reading today. But I hope it makes sense. Sugar Towers in the Sky. I was polishing a large glass jar of lemon sherbets when the endless drizzle of that Sunday morning suddenly stopped. The lemon sherbets winked into the sudden streak of sunlight, like great yellow eyes staring at me. All week from the grey confines of Mrs. Krieger's classroom, I've been dreaming of this crayon-coloured vision. Rows and rows of boiled sweets made ribbons of colour down my dad's formica shelving. Panda nut clusters! The girl's voice rang into my dreamy early morning state. I turned round and dropped my duster. I was kneeling down next to a pair of Jesus sandals. Sorry, I was cleaning up the sweets, I said, raising my face up. A haze of a girl stood before me. Each strand of honeycomb lit up underneath like a nugget of pure gold. The girl customer was stroking one of her fat plaits, deep in concentration. My dad poked his head out from the back of the shop. So, he sung across the shop. It's okay, Dad, I can manage in here, my sister Esther chimed in. My dad's face was pale and blurred. He took off his moon-shaped glasses and the lines on his forehead popped out. Blue shadows lit at the papery skin under his eyes. He was cradling a glass of lemon tea to his chest. Dad, I'll watch over the shop, Esther said. He slunk back to the little room behind the shop. I recognised this girl customer, Siobhan. She was from the clothes store around the corner. She was about 13, same age as me. She helped her mum like I helped my dad in the Sunday market in Petticoat Lane. She had tiny silver droplets sticking to the edges of her plaits. I saw her running through the market, the last of the rain tipping down on her head. A slight tremor went through my hands. Measuring out the chocolates was a newly acquired art for me. I'd had to get it right. Siobhan stood before me clad in emerald green from head to toe. I placed the knobbly chocolate crags in a waxed bag. I held each one delicately by the tips of my fingers. Between each cluster, I glanced up at Siobhan, willing her to be impressed by my deft chocolate handling skills. My sister hissed at me between Revlon-stained lips. I hissed back. Mostly we were on our own in the shop. From time to time, my dad would emerge from the back and gaze round, looking rather baffled at what he was doing in the middle of an East End sweet shop with two young girls of his own. We always knew exactly where he was and what he was doing. In the back he sat, hour after hour, slurping his endless glasses of lemon tea into which he dipped Tate and Lyle sugar cubes, one by one. Next to him lay his battered copy of Great Expectations, pages yellowing and thin like parchment. He spent the in-between times reading the same book over and over again, looking up long words in a giant-sized Oxford dictionary. Times like this one, the ring of the cash till brought him out to the front of the shop, but after a quick look round, he'd leave it all in Esther's hands. He'd go straight back to his reading, not even bothering to say hello to Siobhan. I hardly knew Siobhan. She was one of the girls from what my father called the schmatter business. Esther loved to flaunt her intimate knowledge of the storeholders, and she'd already filled me in on some of the details. Siobhan's mum found pickings of fabric and rolls of material rejected from the factory due to a slight imperfection. She could make something from nothing. The types of clothes they get on the stools, they've all got something missing. A button hanging off, a hem drooping, a line on the stripe of a blouse gone wonky. But she can turn it all around, make it look as new. Esther was always cultivating this wise and worldly tone with me. Since I started working there myself, I noticed she never actually left my father's shop. I was beginning to wonder about the origins of her knowledge. Siobhan loped her grin around her crooked teeth. But it was Esther who flashed her one of her know-it-all smiles back. Of course, Esther was trying to impress Siobhan. She craved an audience at all times. Siobhan made her hands into an open shape. An empty space stretched out over the counter. I put the bag of chocolates into it. Can I have some cough candy for Mama? The ones in the window? Of course, I said, placing my fingers over the golden twists of candy. They were miniature versions of the honey-glazed plaited loaves we ate every Friday night to welcome in Shabbat. I love your green trousers, I belted out to Siobhan over the cough candy twists. Tell you what, I'll get my mum to make you a pair of loons. We've got some green cord in the back of the shop. She patted the emerald ridges on her legs with a huge sigh of satisfaction. Would you like that? Siobhan was peering down at me. Oh, yes, I gasped. I'll come round to your shop when the market ends. Esther looked the daggers at me. Every gesture said, you must be joking. She unsheathed the long-bladed knife we used for cutting up the fudge. Her movements were fast and furious. You're not going anywhere, especially there. She banged box after box of fudge down hard on the cutting table. Some of us have work to do. She didn't start on the fudge herself. She just let the knife lay there, waiting for me. I wasn't giving up my chance. I was dying to see into the little flat where Siobhan lived with her mum and her little brother Jimmy. No one knew about her father. He'd never been there. My dad had said they had their troubles in Ireland too, and that the Irish and the Jews, they had the shared history of the underdog. But as far as I could see, my father never spoke to anyone outside of us. And as for sharing, I'd never seen him sharing anything with anyone. Siobhan flew out the door. Don't forget about the looms, she hurled her words out behind her. So, what's new? Suddenly, my dad was in front of me, his long shadow falling across my white plimsolls. I saw my dad, a scrawny, bug-eyed boy on a ship, thin arms and wrists like a pair of chicken bones, sticking out of a pullover with 2 short sleeves. A stretch of grey sea behind him, and a stretch of grey sea ahead, patched up boots and scraped up knees, hands in the pockets of his trousers. Deep down in his pocket, he was fingering a yellow star, a trace of the father he left behind in Poland. Backwards and forwards went his finger, over and over the yellow starry points, poking into the darkness in his left pocket. Behind him was the shadow of his land. The sky was blank. A stream of harsh words still in his ear. You go. Go safe. Go now. Yiddish words. At 3, I left the shop. I walked across the sugary floor. As I left, I bent down to rub my footprints out of the sugar. But every time I made another step, another print of my plimsolls emerged into the white crystals. I couldn't rub myself out after all. When I finally got out, I glanced back only once. Esther mouthed some words through the plate glass. You go. Go now. She was handing my dad a fresh glass of lemon tea. I ran straight round the corner to Siobhan's shop. So yeah, that's it, heavily edited, but I hope you got the gist. And now I finally want to hand over to Nora, who has some poems for Eve.
Thank you, Julia. I'm going to finish this part of the reading with 2 poems of my own as a tribute to our friend Eve. Life was a struggle for Eve. She had a very hard time. But as you could hear from her writing, she was also gifted with insight and ideas and a passion for life.
That's wonderful, Nora. I'm just wanting to reassure you, I am pausing. Ask everyone to unmute and give a real appreciation for all the beautiful readings. I just thought that we save the applause each time at the end of the set. And thank you for sensitivity and beauty you've delivered, both in Eve's poetry and in your own writing, Nora.
Thank you. Thanks.
So unmute everyone and let's hear applause for these beautiful readings.
Fabulous.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the kind comment.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I am now going to, I wish we could spend longer. Maybe we'll come back to it, question and answer to the themes that have arisen and the beauty. Meanwhile, I'm going to mute everyone and introduce our next poet and remove spotlight. Sorry, multitasking here. I'm not very good at multitasking. Our next poet is Aviva Dautch. Aviva's poems have appeared in publications including Ambit, Acumen, Modern Poetry in Translation, The North, The Rialto, The Spectator and Poetry Review. Residencies and commissions include the Hay and Bradford Literature Festivals for the Gustav Klimt Centenary, the British Museum for Refugee Week, the National Gallery. She is the resident poetry expert on the BBC Radio 4 series on form, and the literary consultant for the BBC World Service journalist Suhrab Siraj. Her translation of his book-length poem, The Eighth Crossing, about his refugee journey from Afghanistan, was published by Exiled Writers Ink in 2021. And I think there is lots more publication in the pipeline, but I've asked these wonderful poets for abridged versions, and I can never quite give them full credit for their achievements. And I'm trying to find Aviva to highlight you and hand over the mic, if only I can find it beyond. Aviva, where are you? Can you unmute yourself, please?
I have done. I'm waving at you, Agata.
You are waving. Oh, there you are. So the stage is yours, Aviva Dautch.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And just want to say thank you for all the lovely readings going before. I'm really honoured that Agata asked me to be part of this evening, because I didn't know Eve, but I now feel that I know her. And in a very real way, I do know who she is, because I'm third generation of refugee Jewish family. And as you're going to hear in a minute, I used to live in Hackney too. I've just come back from New York, and I completely agree with that poem. All I want is to be a New York Jew. So it's a real honour to be here, and I've tried to pick out some themes that I hope relate to Eve and to her poems in the set I'm going to read. And I'm going to start off with a Hackney poem, actually. I lived there quite a long time ago now with my first partner. So my partner was Israeli, and she was someone who'd moved to the diaspora, and we call that in Hebrew Yerida. So going to Israel is going up, Aliyah, but coming to the diaspora, and you can hear the judgment in the Hebrew language here, coming to the diaspora is going down, Yerida, which literally means descent. But she was very restless as well. She moved a lot. You're going to see that from this poem and from another one I'll read. So, Yerida. The only prayer you ever said was the traveller's prayer for the start of a journey. May it be your will, eternal one, Lord our God and God of our ancestors, that we reach our desired destination. The days lengthened as you paced the rooms of our upside-down flat, its kitchen attic high, with a view falling from rooftops to the still black canal, where Hasidim stroll the towpath in their heavy coats. Young enough to have nothing to do but idle away hours with a slowly cooked meal, I brewed tea from mint leaves, watched you washing up the Israeli way under a torrent of running water. I loved the space we made in the heart of London's Jewish ghetto, a photograph of your land above the bed where you tore my Englishness from me, then slipped through my fingers to your next almost home. It's that sense of almost home, but never quite being at home, I think pervades, well, it pervaded my life with her, but it pervades my poetry. Not always being able to grasp what a home is, however hard we try, or when I do create a home, being with someone who never wanted to be there. As you heard from Agata, I got commissioned a few years ago to write for the Gustav Klimt centenary, which was kind of hard for a Jewish lesbian to be writing about one of the most misogynist artists of all time, who had a revolving rota of women through his bed and his studio. But actually, the transformation in those golden paintings of the embrace, of that how do we hold on, I felt that I really related to. So how do we hold on and how do we let go became the subject of the poem I wrote after him. So this is The Embrace. The space between us was not a breach, but an expansion. You, the one who travelled the circumference of the world, and I, the stiff leg of the compass pair, bracing to support us both, fixed to our centre point bodily, my reaching heart split between what I'd always known and desire as liquid as the moon-pulled sea. We tried our best to make our valediction, as Donne suggested, forbidding mourning, careless, but it was not in our leaving but our reuniting that we became airy as beaten gold, our skin raw to the unfamiliar touch, leaf thin, gilded. When we embraced, I wrapped myself into you, your shape a mirror, a home, our hips and breasts slotting into the valleys of the other's curves. Not my twin, but my completion, the body that taught me to know my own. My magnetic north, my lodestone, I drew you close, clung to you like an opulent embroidered coat. A diva would clutch at the neck as its folds swung around her, tightly, while allowing elegance of movement, the physical distance to breathe. My fingers were white from the tension of holding you, the desperate fear you'd once again leave. So I think that sense of knowing that people leave comes from my family history. And the next set of poems I'm going to read relate to that sense of history as a Jew, and also, as you'll see, that kind of refugee background. And the first one is called History Lessons. Before she called the register, she walked between our desks, debating our ancestry from our looks. I was asked to stand up, example of a blue-eyed blonde, an obvious Anglo-Saxon. I'd heard so many stories of German Jews in classrooms being picked as perfect Aryans. Now I wondered whether I would have passed. Each day became a test of camouflage. The words I used, the clothes I wore, the way I tied my hair. I fell in love with another girl, became doubly disguised, hiding it at home from her. It would take years to decide how much to reveal, what was safe for people to know. But on that day I froze when the teacher learned my name and tried to recover. Indeed, you might look English, but your heritage is clear. You have a Jewish nose. And very sadly, that is an absolutely real experience. And it's such a shame because I think had I not had that history teacher, I would have loved history. So instead I learnt my history not from school but from my youth group and from the realities of my family journey. So this poem is Habonim. Habonim is an international Jewish youth group. I can see a few people in the Zoom room nodding. Maybe some of you have been there. It's quite a socialist, European, international one. But the word literally means the builders. So this poem, Habonim, is the builders. The day the wall fell, we played the identity game, had to run to a corner of the room, depending whether we felt British, Jewish, like British Jews, or Jewish Brits. On camp that winter, we acted out the journeys our grandparents made from Russia, Poland, Lithuania, fleeing pogroms. The Holocaust should have been next, but perhaps they thought we were too young. Instead, we became refugees negotiating Checkpoint Charlie, winning points for our team if we smuggled ourselves safely across. Back in school in January, studying the Tudors, I'd switch off, daydream, remembering how we built the Berlin Wall with our bodies, one on top of the other, rejoicing, limbs flying when we came tumbling down. So I'm going to end with one last poem, which is about living history. And the interesting thing is I didn't know she was going to be here, but one of the people I was thinking of is actually in the Zoom room. So a few months ago, I spent some time on the Isle of Man. I took a group of 50 children of Jewish refugees whose parents had been interned there. Some of you may know, some might not, that during World War II, German and Austrian refugees were interned by Churchill. It's a bit like the terrible refugee camps we're hearing about at the moment, but in fact, actually, it was worse. The conditions in some of them were actually pretty horrific. But 30,000, just under 30,000 Jewish refugees were interned for up to 18 months to 2 years on the Isle of Man. One of those actually was the father of Carrie Gorney, who I saw just now in the Zoom room. This poem talks about the Isle of Man and that internment. It was written for the Association of Jewish Refugees, marking the 80th anniversary. But in it, I refer to letters that were written. And funnily enough, one of the people whose letters I was reading was her father, Carrie. I don't know if you know that. Yeah, so when I was there, I was in the museums and archives, and there were all these letters that were about really practical things, about washing and bread and needing your socks darning, you know, the realities of the day. But they also weren't scared to express their emotion. So when I was there, I was just falling for someone, and I didn't yet know how to write to her. So this is kind of what I wrote instead of a letter. Because I kept seeing things that I wanted to tell her about. It's the most bizarre place, the Isle of Man. The first thing is that when you get the bus from the airport to where the hotels are, they stop at the ferry bridge. And the buses actually make an automatic announcement. So this is my epigraph. It's the announcement the buses make at the ferry bridge, which says, "Please serve the Manx tradition and say hi, farers," as we cross the ferry bridge. And it just gets weirder from there. So anyway, Isle of Man. If you were here, we would marvel together at this, at how the tram kisses the side of the cliff, a miracle of suspension, as heedless of risk as the goats that scramble from bush to bush, and the small boats snatching the dish of the day from high waves. Herrings for kippers, I guess, by the smell that wafts up to my room. I check my phone for your texts, for their casual X, then cross the ferry bridge to make my wish, and think of those 80 years before, crammed into boarding houses with locks on the door, listening to the sea hiss against the shore, barbed wire separating them, the enemy alien from its tides, who wrote to the people they'd left, openly saying, "I miss," and begging for things to be sent, for jam, for socks, for needle and thread. and my eyes leak at the banality of their lists, at how frayed they are from being crumpled in fists, at the black holes imposed by the censors, at the desire edging its way through the gaps. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And can we unmute all and give a wonderful applause to Aviva?
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Fantastic reading. Thank you so much. It's beautiful. Thank you. So evocative. We're going to have to move on swiftly to the next person. Thank you, Aviva. Removing spotlight. And our next poet today is Maria Jastrzębska. I feel very lucky that I am able to pronounce your surname. Who was born in Poland and came to UK as a child. Maria's selected poems, The Cedars of Walpole Park, 2015, were translated into Polish. Her poetry is much anthologized and features in the British Library Between the Two Worlds Poetry and Translation Project. She's co-translated Elsewhere by Istok Osojnik and The Great Plan B by Smokestack. She is the co-editor of a number of anthologies, including Queer in Brighton. Following a Wellcome Trust award, her drama Dementia Diaries toured nationally. Recently, a triptych of film poems of Maria's poems was, excuse my dog snoring and coughing, I'm so sorry. Maria's poems were part of Snow Cube, screened internationally. And Maria's new and fifth collection, Small Odysseys, is available via Waterloo Press to buy. Published this year. And let's welcome to the stage, so to speak, Maria. Let's mute everybody else. And Maria, will you unmute yourself, please? Just a second before you do that, I'm just going to put links for Exiled Writers Ink into the dialogue. We're all linked to Exiled Writers Ink. Maria, looking forward to your verses. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Agata. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this event. It's been, so far, it's been incredibly resonant for me and very moving. So like Aviva, I feel very honoured to be here. Yeah. I'm the daughter of people who were also survivors of Nazi occupation and Soviet occupation, and who fled to this country to escape communism. So a lot of what you've all been talking about resonates for me. I'm going to read mostly from my new collection, Small Odysseys. And this book is also, it's got many things, but it is also concerned with history, with LGBTQ history, with Polish history, and also who tells it, who tells that history. I'm going to start with a poem set in childhood. It's where our dreams often begin, and where we live between dream and reality, something I think that Eve's work very much highlights. So I will start there. Fur. In the carved oak wardrobe, so big it stood in the corner, hung my mother's fur coat. I crouched among spare shirt collars, old shoes and belts, careful not to clink the bottles of barley wine. My mother's scent was cloying, sweet, but I rubbed my cheek on her fur crossing the forest of gabardine, wool. I squeezed between long dresses and coats into a country of pines, where children wore crowns, carried swords, rolled petrol bombs under the wheels of tanks. On dark mornings, I folded my bed, kicked the ash of small fires deep into the snow. Hawks screamed above to warn me when secret police closed behind. No matter how cold it was, my husky's breath was always warm. On clear nights, we crossed field and steppe in a sledge. I willed myself over distances, past petrified deer and ice palaces, frozen lakes the size of oceans. Safe in the whistling blizzard, I left borders and villages behind, rode towards the blue silence. The next poem I'm going to read is actually from an earlier publication called I'll Be Back Before You Know It. And it's about one of the synagogues in Krakow. And although it's been restored, it is empty now, and it's used to hold exhibitions like the one in this poem of Andrzej Wajda's drawings, or it shows films like the film Dybbuk by the Jewish filmmaker Ansky. And you may know, but griffins have the task of guarding a congregation or the community who attend a synagogue. And in the title, Vysoka means tall, and that's the name of the synagogue. Synagoga Wysoka. Two griffins in a bare wall remain. After the clutter of churches we've stood in, the throng of gilded statues, carved faces peering down through the scent of wax, fervent colour of frescoes and stained glass. It is so quiet here. Neither Wajda's sketches of dancers whirling pink and copper green as they hold either end of a scarf, nor a black and white video of Ansky's Dybbuk flickering in a corner of the room can fill this emptiness. Sunlight on white walls falls across a fragment of faded Hebrew and tender griffins still on guard. And the next poem I'm going to read is called Magadan. And some of you may know Magadan is a port, and it's where Soviet prisoners were taken and then dispersed to the different labor camps in Siberia. And so this is from an adult point of view. Yeah. Magadan. On days when birds fell from the sky like hailstones, frozen by the air itself, the sun was so small, it was as if it didn't know how to warm the earth anymore. In all that whiteness, they set out past the fence, towards the empty plain, to pull beetroots from the ground. On cold nights, as we burrow under down, it seems an indulgence to think of them. But I see their footprints in and out of the perimeter, follow them as they're marched again to lie next to each other on wooden pallets. And what else except this thought? Retrograde comet, its heat lost in all that distance, the flare of its tail still bright enough to be visible. What else can I send back to them? One of the things that's happened both in Poland and in the UK is that history, and particularly the history of the Second World War in Poland, has very much been hijacked in order to bolster nationalistic rhetoric and justify dreadful ideas and policies. And in the UK, I think history has been hijacked in order to bolster and support sort of notions of making Britain great again and all of that. So partly in this book, I'm interested in kind of reclaiming or reimagining or exploring our relationship to history for ourselves. On the 70th anniversary of the Warsaw Uprising, Ola says, "Oh, politicians, they love a dead hero. All my life, I've wanted to build a shelter. You see, birch bark and mud plaited through boughs of pine keep out the wind. I'd lean my shelter of debris against a dry base of spruce, save the lower twigs for tinder. Those whose bodies lie under open sky, I'd hide them, wounded, dead, with no one beside them, in war, in peacetime. But if I ask Eula and Ola what poems should be about, they say, write about this day and the next, about quarrelling, then running for the bus, about dropping your ticket. Write about birches if you must, but mostly write about kissing. And I'm going to finish with the last poem called Bleu Nuit. And it's kind of in a way, it touches on insecurity, which I think many of us struggle with, insecurity about ourselves, about our worth, about our work. And of course that insecurity has its roots and origins in our childhood. So in a way, this poem harks back to childhood dreams, and it's a poem about dreams, but also about birds. Bleu Nuit. These dreams are as common as pigeons. They settle on your bed preening. At the sound of the central heating or the car door slamming outside, they're gone. A few feathers remain, grey-blue. You dream everyone else's poems are more clever than yours, full of stark images, exotic birds, inked in bleu azur, bleu myosotis, éclat de saphir. Your poems only contain lost teeth, a car with no steering wheel, everyday things. So many bags to carry, balancing a metal birdcage too. By morning, snow blows in. You stumble down to make tea, but the kitchen shelves are crammed with rows of pigeons, their hearts beating as one. Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you very much for listening. I can't wait to hear the next part.
Thank you, Maria. Fantastic. I'm going to ask everybody to unmute and and show your appreciation by loud applause. Thank you, Maria. Fantastic.
Fantastic. Wonderful.
Food for thought. Yes, reimagining our connection to Polishness. I can relate to that a lot. Thank you. Unpin you from the spotlight. And our next amazing, oh, and I'm going to mute everyone again. Our next fabulous poets, got very patient poets waiting their turn. Thank you so much. Is Viv Fogel. Viv's poems have been published in various anthologies and magazines since the mid-70s. Adopted by refugee Holocaust survivors, once an art teacher involved with community and social education projects, she has, since the mid-80s, worked as a psychotherapist. Her second collection, Imperfect Beginnings, is to be published with award-winning ethical press Fly on the Wall in February next year, 2023. Please, let's welcome Viv to stage. I have to find you to highlight you. I shall in just a moment. Oh, there you are. Fantastic. Over to you, Viv.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? I am unmuted. Okay. And yes, thank you so much for asking me to be here. I'm very honoured as well. It's a privilege to hear all the other poems and really wonderful. So I was thinking about the theme of exiles and the different ways that we can be exiled. And just briefly, I was adopted by two traumatized parents, more so my adoptive mother. And in a way, that's one kind of exile, when you are taken away from your birth mother and placed elsewhere after a while. And I liken that with people that are also torn away from their motherland or their homeland. So there's a parallel. So the first poem is actually called Exiles, and the first part is about a little bit about my experience. The second is about refugees, or people that are exiled from their home. Exiles. 1. For one precious moment, you were my whole world, safe, holding, and mine. Then gone. I was alone, no recognizable thing to grasp, no roots to clasp, no ground. The landscape changed. Familiar smells, textures vanished. The terrain became hostile. 2. Torn from your homeland, you strain towards a dream beyond your grasp. The fruits you reach for are a mirage. The sand slipsides away. Now is the waiting game. Questions, papers returned, visas granted or delayed. In yellow rooms you wait, you sit watching the clock, not daring to hope. Stranger, I welcome you, rootless as I, to this bitter sweet land. So another form of exile is poverty, and I grew up with an adoptive, traumatized, bipolar mother, although in those days they were called manic depressive, and she was often in and out of hospital. And we lived in poverty in the first part of my schooling. So I based this on partly my own experience and also the children I worked with for many years in Islington and around there. So as a teacher. When poverty is a keep out sign and shame the smell that follows you, when you wear your school shirt inside out to hide the frayed and unwashed collar, When there's a whiff of menstruation you hope goes unnoticed, like the sock stained at the toe that sticks and opens the wound when pulled. When you keep your eyes downcast for fear they will be met, where do you go, child? I see you, all slouch and kick curb in tight scuffed trainers. You glitter search garbage, rummage, sift stores, store bins, niff of sell-bys, your hunger growling. When there's no place to chill, the centre's closed and the park lurks with winos and dealers, where's there to go? Some get wasted in piss-foul alleys, swagger their tails, score and dare, compare blades, suck teeth as you pass by in worn-out hood, tight breath, eyes down, silently praying to stay invisible. My father sold cigarettes to the Nazis, and this is for my adoptive father. Blue-eyed and handsome, he nodded and grinned at them through the coffee houses of Berlin, the cakes and cabaret, a sweet tooth and an eye for women. He wrote funny verse, made his friends laugh, turned horror into humor, played the joker, protected me from the truth. My father loved to polish wooden banisters, brass door handles, candlesticks, our boots, always polishing. Buchenwald was his camp, but Butlins it was not. I wasn't meant to hear about the officer's leather belt, his polished boots, of the baby tossed into the air, skull cracking beneath the boot. And once, he upturned the kitchen table, mouth foaming, as plates slid cracking to the floor. He died a year before the Berlin Wall came down, the year my baby was born. I sat by his bed and fed him, as once he fed me. I stroked his baby head, made him smile at my jokes, as his watery eyes were fading. I traced his burnt, scarred arm, tapped my fingers along numbers, the same blue-grey as his veins, longing to unlock his story. He held my baby in his arms, just once, a little awkward, a little shy, a big man, grown small. On not writing the Holocaust. I was not there, yet when I see dense forests, barbed wire, rail tracks, something in me remembers. The stench of it slips between the lines, urges me to transcribe, make sense of it, but I can't, I was not there. Striped pajamas, a soft leather valise, a postcard from the Stoke potteries, funnels of dark smoke unfurling, a lost child's shoe by the canal, the absence of birdsong, a field of stones and silence. Many will roll their eyes, move on. So I do not write the Holocaust. I was not there. I was not there. I've written a lot in my new collection, my second collection, about my parents' experience of the Holocaust and how it's come down transgenerationally. But I decided not to read them now. But I wrote a poem last week for Eve, based on all my life I've wanted to be a New York Jew. So it's a little bit of a tribute to her. and I thought I'd end with it as a little bit lightness, and it will probably be redrafted, so forgive me. But anyway, one thing I appreciate about being Jewish is Jewish humor. So I hope this will come into it. All my life, I have wanted to throw out the orange cat, slide down waterfalls, parkour clouds, be a photojournalist, shower in light. All my life, I've wanted to time travel, defy age, ride a Harley down the motorway, swim fearlessly out of my depth. I yearned for silk straight hair, bony knees, to be sculpted instead of Zoftig, a blonde gazelle, not a strudel. I wanted to perform stand-up in Soho, like Sarah Silverman, reverse prejudices with chutzpah, push boundaries. I wanted to slip beyond surfaces, to see the coloration of souls, the signals from God. All my life, I have wanted to be a New York Jew, with their psychoanalysis, their entitled neuroses and assimilated bagels. I wanted to be part of, to belong, knowing that it suffocates, that I'll protect myself from it. All my life, noch, wanting, waiting. So, thank you.
Wow, thank you, Viv, and particularly, additionally, for this beautiful, touching surprise. I didn't know you were going to write something. It explains it all. Would you please all unmute? Oh, find the right button, unmute, and give a round of applause for fantastic poetry here. Fantastic.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And incredibly personal in so many different levels. My father held my baby once with baby heads after his chemo. Oh. Thank you. Sorry, you're muted. Sorry. Did you want to unmute yourself? I muted everyone. Sorry. Because there was some background noise. And thank you. Wish we could give at least half an hour to each, but we have to move on. Our next poet tonight is Liz Cashdan, a poet living in Bristol with, this is a very, very abridged version of her bio, because we could write lots more about each poet tonight. Her parents came to the UK in the 1920s as Russian Jewish refugees. She teaches creative writing for an open college of the arts and for the Folk House in Bristol. Her most recent publication is Things of Substance, New and Selected Poems, 5 Leaves Publications. She runs an online stanza group for the Poetry Society and is a poetry editor for Jewish Renaissance. She likes writing about people and places, and I have absolute pleasure to be in a stanza with Liz as well. Remove spotlight. Sorry, multitasking here. And Liz, I think I found you. Yes. Welcome. Let's welcome Liz to stage. All yours.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. Lovely to be here. And I've got some references to Habonim and to the Isle of Man because my brother-in-law was there. So not being an exiled or refugee myself, but I am the daughter of Russian emigres, Russian Jewish emigres. So that word emigre is really kind of white Russian and not Jewish, so I don't like to use it. I'd rather call them refugees than emigres. But the first poem I'm going to read is about a discovery that I was born and lived the first few years of my life just round the corner from where Sigmund Freud was a refugee in Hampstead in 1938. So this is imagining and visiting the house round the corner and the famous couch. So this poem is called Couch. While my sister and I play doctors on our sitting room ottoman at 3 Nutley Terrace, round the corner at 20 Maresfield Gardens, there's an old Viennese refugee practicing psychoanalysis with patients on his famous couch, though cancer will soon force him to sleep on a medical couch of his own. And if you should ask us what a Freudian slip is, we'll say, when he loses his footing on the way down to the Cosmo Cafe on Finchleystrasse, eager for Wiener Schnitzel, beef goulash, Kaffee und Kochen. Now in Hampstead once more as tourists, our house a doctor's surgery, we see the Cosmos gone Indian, has a blue plaque in memory of refugees. Number 20's a museum. We linger in Freud's study, mesmerized by African masks and figures, admire the furnishings. My sister, a retired pediatrician, stares at the couch with its carpet rug, just like our ottoman.
Lovely.
And the next poem I want to read is again a true story, slightly fictionalized, and based on the experience of my 2 elder sisters in 1938, who were on holiday in Menton, French town on the border with Italy. And of course, 1938 was the year Mussolini promulgated his anti-Jewish laws, and the refugees from Poland and Germany who had come to Italy hoping for refuge suddenly found themselves on the run again. And the story will unfold itself, so I hope I don't have to explain anything more. It's in the voice, but my 2 sisters were teenagers at the time, and this is in the 17-year-old, the voice of the 17-year-old talking about her and her 18-year-old sister's experiences. Incident at the frontier, 1938. We've walked a couple of miles from Menton to the Italian border, Ventimiglia. We've chatted up the French border guards, but we can't do Italian, so we ignore the Bersaglieri, though I've rather fallen for their feathers. Time to go back, says my sister. It's getting dark. We hear the train door slam, the engine whistle. In the quiet that follows, the waves murmur on the pebble beach. All's right with the world, though we know Mussolini's world is not all right. New laws against Jews in Italy now. Oh, well, we're on holiday. Nothing we can do. Then running footsteps, a man, a woman, dragging a 2-year-old, curls flopping, sobbing in German. The man calls out, "Alt, per favore, bitte, inglesi? Ah, s'il vous plaît." The woman pushes the child towards us, stutters in broken French, hard to understand. "S'il vous plaît, take Lottie. We'll come by the mountain route. No papers. She's too small. In the casino tomorrow morning. Oh, vielen Dank." And Lottie is in my sister's arms, and the mum and dad have disappeared into the twilight. And we are left with the child calling, "Mutti, Mutti," and the French guards calling, "Eh bien, vite, mademoiselle, on va fermer. Allez vite," as they hustle us through, not looking at passports, or Lottie, smiling now as my sister sings, "Fuchs, du hast die Gans gestohlen," in her best 6th form German. But what if the mum and dad don't turn up tomorrow? What on earth will we do? In fact, the mum and dad did turn up, but my sisters lost touch and were never able to track them down. So I guess they disappeared somewhere in France. The last poem I want to read tells the story of refugees from my mother's time in Białystok in Poland, which was then Tsarist Russia, through to Palestine. So it's a kind of swings and roundabouts, if you could use such a jolly term for the refugee story across a century. And it's called Voices from the Shark's Mouth. And the phrase the shark's mouth was coined by the British Somali poet Warsan Shire, who wrote a poem called Home. And she wrote, "No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well." So this is a story of voices from the shark's mouth. And the first voice is my mother, whose name, I've changed the names in this just so there's no identification, particularly when we get to Israel-Palestine at the end. So my mother isn't actually Rosa, but she's Rosa in my poem. Rosa's voice sings out across the years. "Why have you called me back? I've seen enough." 1904, the Russo-Japanese War, thousands killed, the wounded brought back with hollow eyes. The family factory makes cloth for uniforms, but the eyes still haunt. Rosa's only a schoolgirl, ready to study, to become a doctor, go to Brussels, no university for Jewish women in Tsarist Russia. Then 1906, the pogroms in Białystok, the Cossacks, wild beasts stirring up the locals to attack, attack, attack. She can't help seeing the blood in the streets. She can't speak. The dead haunt her. Soon she'll be a refugee in England. But the voice of Joseph, who will be her son-in-law, sings out as he runs from the Nazi shark's mouth. His dad has a farm and butchery, does well till 1933. House near the Belgian frontier, their local pub closer, the front door in Germany, the back door leading to Belgium. Joseph helps hundreds of Jews through those doors till the Nazis catch wind of it. So he takes that route himself, flees to England, works on a farm. Then someone shouts, "Hey, enemy alien!" as if they have green faces and horns. He's rounded up, shipped to the Isle of Man, housed in Hutchinson Square, Douglas. When released, he lives in Manchester, falls in love with Rosa's daughter. They find a new homeland, pioneers in Palestine. But now, years later, I hear Yusuf's voice from the village of Fakit in the West Bank, a desperate shout to Rosa, to her daughter, to Joseph, to his kids, to his grandkids. "Now my house is in ruins," Yusuf sings out. "You've bulldozed it. Where can I run to? You and your children have made my home a shark's mouth." Thank you.
Was this your last poem? Thank you so much. I see you've muted yourself. It was, yes, you have muted yourself.
So I could read one more.
Just a short one?
Yeah, okay. And this goes back in history. So again, not personal experience, but I was doing some work on Pepys's diary. And one of the people who Pepys met was the head of the Jewish community, as it was a tiny community in his time, Antonio Carvajal, who was of Portuguese origin. And Pepys writes in his diary that he went to the synagogue in Church Lane, and he was rather taken aback to see the Jews walking round and round the synagogue with the Sefer Torah in their hands, singing and dancing. He thought it wasn't very seemly. So I've written this in the voice of Mary Carvajal, who's not mentioned, but she must have been around because she was his wife. There came to our synagogue last week in Church Lane a certain Mr. Pepys with his wife, that same gentleman who intended the memorial to my husband not many weeks since, and was operated himself by the surgeon who removed my dear Antonio's bladder stone, though Mr. Pepys survived the surgeon's knife. Now, this Mr. Pepys provides all things for the king's ships, for which I have to be grateful. It was an English ship that brought us on our journey from France after we'd fled first Portugal, then Spain, to escape from the Inquisition. The occasion of Mr. Pepys' visit was our festival of Simchat Torah, the rejoicing of the law, when our menfolk carried the Torah scrolls round the synagogue, singing and dancing in praise of the Lord. But Mr. Pepys found this tradition lacked the decorum expected in a church, and I fear he's been influenced too much by the Puritans. My Antonio could do business with anybody, Jew or Christian, protector, and had he lived long enough, the king. Indeed, he traded east and west, and our 3 black servants hailed from Suriname, where my husband used to do trading and business.
Thank you, Liz. And let's unmute and appreciate, oh, where can I find, my button has gone missing. Thank you so much for incredibly evocative and sharp as shark's teeth poetry in places. Yes, round of applause, everyone, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to unpin you, remove spotlight, and bring the spotlight to our last, not least, poet, amazing Nazand Begikhani. And I'm really mesmerized and humbled by the so many multilingual people here. So there is a risk that I will mispronounce something. I'm going to leave the meeting. We need to, Lester, can you mute people who have forgotten to mute themselves, please? That would be really helpful. Maybe I'll do that for now. So Nazand Begikhani is a writer, poet, and a Vincent Wright Chair, visiting professor of sciences in Paris. She published 8 poetry collections in Kurdish, French, and English. A polyglot, she has translated Eliot and Baudelaire into Kurdish. In 2012, she received the Simon Landré Poetry Prize for her collection L'Ela de Mer d'Hier. Forgive me the mispronunciation. A feminist, Nazand is also an ardent advocate of human rights. She survived the Kurdish genocide and experienced the murder of many of her family members, including her 3 brothers. She rebuilt herself in exile, where she created a space for freedom and creativity, becoming the symbol of resilience and resistance. It's a real privilege to have almost like crescendoed to you, Nazand, through incredibly rich and abundant storytelling from each and every person here. So over to Nazand now. The stage is yours. Welcome, and so looking forward to your set. Please, can you unmute yourself?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone from Kurdistan. I'm honored to be here with you. I would like to dedicate my session to the soul of Jina Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old Kurdish girl who was brutally murdered by the morality police 7 weeks ago in Tehran. And also to her mother, Mujgan, and to all women in Kurdistan and in Iran who are fighting for freedom and against obscurantism. I am going to read some of my poems that can resonate with Eva's work as well. The first poem is dedicated to Jina Mahsa Amini. It's called Jina Bendan. I'm actually going to read it in Kurdish. It's very short. It's called Jina Bendan after her real Kurdish name. Mahsa is her official name because Kurdish parents in Iranian Kurdistan are not allowed to name their kids with Kurdish names officially. Jina Bendan. وەک خەون هاتی وەک جوانی بەسەر ڕقدا هەڵهاتی وەک وزە هەڵچووی بوویت بە ڕۆشنایی بەسەر نائومێدی کۆڵانەکانی نیشتیماندا داباری ئەوە تا لە تاریکایی ڕۆحمان هەڵدەسی و بە تاڵە قژی هیوا کۆمان دەکەیتەوە. The same poem in English, Jina Bendan. You came like a dream, a beauty shining over hatred. As a spirit, you have become the light pouring down over the dark alleys of our time. Flying into the beyond, you uplift our lonely souls, binding us to a thin thread of hope. The second poem is called Journey with My Jewish Friend. To Nira Yuvaldedes. I invited her to my country, and she said she was not sure she would be able to go, as she was born in Tel Aviv. Let us go and visit my country, my friend. But don't tell me of your birthplace. Our lands have caused suffering. And I find it difficult to hide my tears when I read in my passport nationality undetermined. Let us go and make our visit. We are together on this journey. Yes, I'm angry by the way I've been defined and grieve the politics that shaped my existence. I admit I've been confused, longing for a piece of land I'm not allowed to name. Let us go and make our visit, my friend, for we are together on this journey. Do you mind if you don't talk of war and keep a distance from their borders when divided with our spirits far away from our bodies? What can bring us together? Yes, I find it hard to connect to a world that denies my existence. Where do I belong? Oh, please don't talk to me of war. Let us go and make our visit, my friend, for we are together on this journey. Do you mind if we don't tell the truth when stopped at checkpoints in Istanbul? And I promise I will not tell you truth when questioned at passport control in Iraq. Let us go and make our visit, my friend, for we are together on this journey. Did you say these are cliches? But you see, we are bound by them. Where do you come from? They asked. I can't answer this question, I said, for I am Kurdish. You can't answer the question, for you are Jewish. Let us just go and make our visit, my friend, for we are together on this journey. At a happiness symposium in Wales, there are two words here, and Anfal is the name of the Kurdish genocide carried out by Saddam Hussein against the Kurdish civilians in the 80s in Iraq. And Halabja is the town which was bombarded by the chemical weapon in 88. At a happiness symposium in Wales, a psychologist said, graveyards may help you feel happier. Visit a graveyard when you are depressed. There's a thin line between life and death, my friend, and I am a graveyard. I am happy to be alive, my friend. After Halabja and Anfal, I am happy to become the voice of a land that contains the mass graves of our brothers. There is a thin line between life and death, my friend. There is a thin line between life and death. Hear Me There tells the story of being torn apart between two locations. I am a white shadow between here and there. My past was a goddess in the east. At dawn, my mother would cover her with a veil of light. Mystics would meditate on her. Mullahs fear her. At night, majestically, Malakaus held her hand to the dome of self-knowledge. In the mornings, the young knelt to her chestnut plates, and she lied in Anna. Inside her temple of beauty, waited for Doomsday. My present is in Paris, sitting in the Grand Cluny Café with a group of men friends discussing Jean-Paul Sartre's L'être et le néant. After a row over le deuxième sexe of de Beauvoir, Haval said, let's go for a promenade by the Seine. Walking across Le Pont Mirabeau, I meditate on time flowing under the bridge. My future is sleeping between east and west, dreaming of both. God is not dead for my mother. Truth is an illusion, said Nietzsche. For my mother, who's never been to school, truth is standing up calmly after a deluge, planting a garden with serene hands, speaking the language of trees, and understanding the alphabet of rain. For my mother, truth is reading the silence of my brother's faces as they lie in stone, and seeing in the blueness of the sky a plume of light tracing a path which stretches deep beyond the cloud and the stars. When you can trace the wide wings of your dead children flying over the path of light in the azure of the sky, you don't need God to die. Journey. I walked in the land of souls, and in the distance I saw myself. I walked in the land of souls, and in the distance I saw myself, a watery sky full of darting little fishes. I went on beyond things beyond words, beyond the body, beyond the wind, then I came across myself. And the last poem, a very short poem called Calm. Let us lie down, close our eyes and listen to the music of the sun, to the grass singing. Let words have a rest and speech a little siesta. Thank you very much.
Ah, and what a beautiful ending you've chosen, Nazand. Thank you so much. Let's open up and have a big round of applause. Absolutely. Absolutely. Bravo.
Wow.
Thank you. And let's have an even bigger round of applause for all the poets so far tonight. Just absolute abundance.
Wonderful.
Thank you. And this blessing of abundance has made us overrun. I'm aware of it. But it would be wonderful to have a little question and answer for another 7 minutes. That's unfair. I know it's unfair, but we could be here till tomorrow, honestly, I'm sure, sitting around the fire preferably and talking. So I'm going to remove the spotlight from Nazand. Thank you. And maybe we have time for 3 short questions, like maximum 3 short questions. I know you've got hundreds of questions, maybe. Anybody with a hand up? If there are no questions, we're going to...
Agata, sorry, can I just ask Liz where we might be able to find a copy of her poem about the shark's mouth? Because I would do work with refugees and I would love to share that poem with them. Is it in the latest collection, Liz?
No, it's not been published.
Okay.
So find me a publisher.
Okay.
I can send you a copy of it willingly too. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was performed in a small drama group on refugees in Bristol, but that's the only publication apart from tonight. So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I will do that.
Can you put your email in the chat?
Certainly, I will. Yes.
That's a good point. If you have links to your books, I know that Nazand, there are lots of other books you could send us the link for, in your book with the color in French too. If there are any links you want to put in the chat, do so now so people can quickly copy them out. And just once more, let me check if there is any burning question, even just one question that people want to close with. Thank you so much for being here. Nobody has put their hand up, because I think that the abundance of all the subjects that have been covered, modalities and languages and prose and poetry and yeah.
Agata, Jennifer here. I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all your work in putting this together on the technical side, creative side, and what have you, to create such a memorable evening. Actually, I was one of those people who did meet Eve, but albeit too fleetingly at the Poetry Cafe in Covent Garden. But I had no idea she was such a gifted writer. I'm really bowled over. And of course, thank you to all the poets who all in their own individual way paid homage to Eve. And really, there's so much to reflect on about this evening. And thank you to everyone.
Thank you. And for those who didn't realize, Jennifer created Exiled Writers Ink and has been the force, inspiration, energy, application filler, and with her crew, with her tribe behind, changing hundreds, thousands of lives by now in 22 years since it started. So that's the best applause we can finish this evening on for Exiled Writers Ink and for, you know, you creating the space and continuing so. May the funding come forth. Thank you so much for everyone as contribution in bringing your poetry, bringing yourself here, and let the poetry spread, the healing power of poetry. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Agata. Thank you.
And goodbye, everyone. Let's finish.
Thank you.
You know.
Fantastic.